All right, so I'm going to give you a few words: January, Blumhouse, and reboot. That kind of stuff doesn't exactly tickle the ears of movie fans, does it? So, is Wolfman just another January Blumhouse movie? Well, I'll tell you what I think. What is up, everyone? Welcome to Mad Blood, and for the second time in 2 months, we're getting a new werewolf movie in theaters. The first one being Werewolves, which came out in December. And these two movies, Wolfman and Werewolves, they could not be any more different. Werewolves was definitely more of like a schlocky, almost a so bad that it's kind of a good type of werewolf movie with some crazy werewolf effects and just action and all kinds of stuff going on, whereas this movie is definitely more of a slower paced, kind of an atmospheric werewolf movie, a little bit more of like that gritty type of a feel. So Wolfman is a reboot of The Wolfman from 1941, a very iconic movie, a very important movie, especially for just the werewolf subgenre just in general, a movie that created a lot of the tropes in that subgenre that we're so familiar with when it comes to werewolves. And like I said, just a very important movie, not only just in horror, but just in movie making, just in general. We also had the movie The Wolfman from 2010, which was a remake of that movie with people like Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt. A movie so crazy with the production, everything behind the scenes when it was released, just a wild up and down journey that even the president of Universal Studios at that time, Ronald Meyer, called it one of the worst movies they had ever made. All right, so back to Wolfman. And just a heads up as well, this will be a spoiler-free review, but right off the bat in this movie, the opening sequence especially, some of the visuals with this forest and just the landscape, I love it. I'm a sucker for this type of a setting. It's supposed to take place in Oregon. I know they filmed the movie technically in New Zealand, but this is a landscape and just an environment, especially for a movie like this, that I really enjoy. I've spent a lot of time in the woods of Oregon and just driving around the small towns of Oregon. And just this story in general, when you think about a place like Oregon, this is a story that definitely works for that type of environment. If you've ever been up there, if you've ever been up in the small towns or the woods, you have entire towns up there that are based around stories of stuff like Bigfoot sightings, selling Bigfoot merchandise all over the place, other, ghost stories or just campfire stories that you would hear about hikers running into things in the woods or campers running into mysterious creatures or things like that. So a setting like that, and somebody who grew up hiking and camping a lot and hearing ghost stories about stuff like that aren't technically ghosts, but you get what I'm saying, stories about Bigfoot sightings or other weird and unusual creatures. It's just something that I eat up. There's also this time jump in the movie, which I feel like to me was pretty effective in building our main character's backstory, because then it interweaves with some of the stuff, obviously, that's going to happen in the middle of the movie and at the end of the movie and make those scenes a little bit more impactful, especially that final frame of the movie. But I do think they do an effective job of building the character's backstory in this movie. And just to piggyback off of that a little bit, I think this story in general is a story that, for me personally, is very relatable. So you've got this guy who's trying to essentially break this childhood trauma that he had as a kid and kind of break that from continuing from kid to kid to kid in kind of the family line. He's trying to consciously think of things that he's doing with his daughter. He catches himself kind of slipping up and trying to just kind of correct some of the things that he had to go through as a kid, which we do see in the movie a little bit. And I think that's just something for me personally that I can relate to. A lot of parents can. They're always thinking about things that maybe they went through. Even if you had a great childhood, there's always going to be some things that you're going to think about and you're going to want to try to somewhat prevent that's going to happen to your kids in some sort of a way. But mainly my point is there are some things in this story that I do think, if you are a dad or just a parent in general, will work better for you than it might for, just say, if I was 20 years old and I went and saw this movie, I hadn't been married, I hadn't had kids or anything like that. It would still kind of work, but I do think just for me personally, that stuff hits home just a little bit more. I also love the way this movie looks. Throughout the first half kind of chunk of the movie, it's kind of dusk a little bit. And then also the scenes that we get where it's very much in the middle of the night, it's not too dark. It's a weird thing to talk about, but it's something I wanted to point out because I think in this movie, it feeds very well into the eeriness and the atmosphere of this movie, just how well I think they shot it. And for somebody like me, I love atmosphere in my horror movies. Of course, I also love the movies that are completely ridiculous and all over the place and are just like silly and are more of a comedy. But a movie like this, a werewolf movie that's like a little bit more gritty, a little bit more of a serious movie, even if the dialogue isn't all that great or the story isn't all that groundbreaking, to me, a movie like this, if you hit that atmosphere just right, it can definitely carry the movie. I mean, just looking back at 2024, one of the biggest reasons why I enjoyed movies like Azrael, Oddity, Alien Romulus wasn't because the story or the script or some other things was completely mind-blowing, but the way those movies made you feel, the atmosphere of it, just the vibe of the movie I thought was great. And I do think in Wolfman, I think the atmosphere in this movie and just the overall like ambience of it is pretty damn good. Now, I just saw the movie last night, but when I think about this movie, I really do think I enjoy how little music they used in this movie, which sounds a little weird to say, but they really don't use a lot of music in this movie until like the very end of the movie. I mean, there are long stretches of this movie where all you really hear is like the forest, people breathing, and maybe something moving around off in the distance, which I really do think adds to that eeriness. It adds to that tension that they're building and building and building. This isn't a movie full of just crazy jump scares that happen all over the place. No, it's definitely kind of that quiet build tension, which also I think adds to the immersiveness of the movie. It almost feels like you're in it because obviously if you were experiencing this, there wouldn't be somebody playing a soundtrack in the background. So I think those moments pretty effective for me. There is something about this movie, though, that I'm kind of a little bit back and forth on. We get a little bit of this perspective of what it's like for a werewolf, kind of what they see and kind of their POV a little bit of a way. I don't want to spoil too much. That does incorporate quite a bit of CGI, which doesn't always look all that great at times. I would look at that as a little bit more of a negative for me. I get where they're going with that. It's giving you the perspective of this person and kind of what they're going through and how that might be frustrating and just kind of what they see in general. But also at the same time, do I think it was pulled off all that well? I don't know. I don't think it was great, but necessarily does it ruin the movie for me? No, I wouldn't say that, but it's just kind of, like I said, I'm back and forth on it. I'll definitely need to rewatch that. Oh yeah, for all you Saw fans out there, Leigh Whannell does give you a little Saw moment in the movie, which I think Saw fans will appreciate. Also, as far as the werewolf transformation stuff in this movie, obviously that is a big part of werewolf movies just in general, but I think in this movie, it felt kind of fresh and a little bit unique to me. It's not like, oh, it's a full moon, boom, we got a werewolf on our hands, or, oh, this person got bit or scratched or whatever, and now we've got a werewolf. No, it's very much a slow build, a slower transformation. It very much feels like somebody who's getting sick and just slowly and slowly and slowly things are building. Now, that isn't a spoiler because we know who transforms in this movie. If you've seen any of the trailers, if you've even read the plot synopsis, you know who transforms in this movie. So that's not a spoiler, but still, I do think the transformation process, the creative choice to make it a very slow building process, I think that worked for me. Speaking of working for me, I do think the end of this movie does work for me. The end of this movie definitely made me feel something, which, like I said earlier, because they put in the effort to build the characters' backstories and some of the other things with just the stories and the dynamics between the different characters who are still alive at the end of the movie, I think it's impactful. It kind of made me feel something. And a lot of movies don't do that. So just the fact that it was able to do that, I think it worked well for me personally. And like I mentioned earlier, the final frame of this movie, I really liked how they kind of kicked in the music right away. And I think it was a great choice to end the movie that way. Like I said, taking that final frame and weaving that back into a key moment in the movie that happened earlier in the movie, I think was a great choice, and honestly, it worked for me. Now, I think there's something to be said about a movie that kind of lingers with you after you leave the theater. So my movie theater that I go to typically is surrounded by quite a few trees, and I remember leaving the theater last night and thinking about this movie. And I love that. And I know next time I'm up in Oregon, I will definitely be thinking about this movie. All right, so do I think you should see Wolfman? Well, I think if you love this type of a setting, and I think if you're in the mood for something slower, something atmospheric, with a small cast, without a lot of different locations and a lot of different variety, in that type of a way, I think you will enjoy it because honestly, I wasn't bored at all when I watched this movie. And yeah, maybe that was partly because of the sugar rush that I was on from the extra large Sprite that I was sipping on, but I still had a pretty good experience with this movie. Me personally, I would see this movie in the theater because I think a movie that focuses so much on the atmosphere and the kind of the sound design and the look of the movie, I think that type of a movie works so well on just like the biggest screen with the best sound that you can possibly get. But I also think if you watch this movie maybe at nighttime at home, it'll still work pretty well for you as well. But Wolfman was kind of exactly what I expected, an isolated movie that mainly takes place in one location, a small cast, which were things that I was honestly kind of a little skeptical about and a little bit worried about going into the movie. I was like, man, is this going to be enough? Is there going to be enough going on to keep me interested in this movie? I was also kind of like, okay, a $25 million budget. But after seeing the movie, you can definitely tell they put a lot of that budget, I'm sure, into the effects with the creature design and stuff like that. But I think with this movie, with that said, and some of the things that I was worried about, with the lighting and how well Leigh Whannell pulled off the atmosphere in this movie, I think it made for a fun little 100-minute journey. Now, do I think this movie will blow you away? No, absolutely not. Do I think this movie will end up being one of the top 5 horror movies of the year? I would be honestly shocked by that. It's not that type of a movie, but I do think Wolfman is a fun time if you keep in mind some of the things that I mentioned earlier. But there you go, everybody. Thanks so much for watching my thoughts, my review of Wolfman. If you want some more videos from me right now, go ahead and check out one of these videos next to me. If you don't want to miss future videos, the best way to do that is to make sure you subscribe. But my name is Matt. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Really appreciate it. And I will talk to you in the next one.